And the digital media side is extremely limited. You're not allowed, for a variety of reasons, to use most of those scalable options in the market like Google and Facebook and Instagram.
From Bumminit Media, it's the MJBulls podcast, a show about raising cannabis capital. I'm Dan Humiston, and on today's show, how Good Harvest Co. is using existing cannabis customer data to overcome the current cannabis advertising roadblocks. Hey, Eric. Thanks for joining us on the MJBulls podcast.
Hey, Dan. Thank you. Appreciate you having us on today.
Well, today we're with Eric Meth from his company, Good Harvest Co., a data-led cannabis audience platform, and how investors can participate. But before we get to the Good Harvest story, Eric, let's talk a little bit about your career and what led you to cannabis.
Sure, Dan. So I've always been involved in the consumer packaged goods, CPG industry, tied into retail, mainly from a marketing and advertising perspective for a good 25 years or so. I started early with print consumer promotions, migrated over relatively early to digital media, worked with large media companies like the New York Times and News Corp. But the last 7 years had responsibilities overseeing both consumer packaged goods and retailer, namely around data and working with that data to create more efficacy through advertising technology. When I looked at the cannabis industry, probably a good year ago or so, I really saw through a CPG marketer's lens. This is an industry that's growing rapidly. So looking at the similarities and the comparisons, I really wanted to take that great base of 25 years of career experience and apply it in a really thoughtful and purposeful way to the cannabis industry.
Well, I know most of our listeners understand the cannabis industry, but I don't think any of them completely can appreciate or understand why the marketing is so challenging. Can you tell our listeners why current cannabis conditions make marketing to customers in the cannabis industry so much harder than they are in other industries?
The main challenge that exists right now, there's a limited number of media options in the market that allow for brands to reach those cannabis shoppers and cannabis consumers. And the digital media side is extremely limited. You're not allowed, for a variety of reasons, to use most of those scalable options in the market like Google and Facebook and Instagram. Paid search and social media also have a lot of limitations. Digital media that is available typically is very low quality. What we'll call mid-tail and long-tail sites, blog sites, don't really reach a huge concentration of desirable audience. And mobile options are very scarce too. And that's important when you're especially trying to target within specifically defined areas where cannabis is legal. So that's really the limitations that are there.
Yeah, and if there was a way to overcome those cannabis limitations, what kind of opportunities would that create? Just obvious opportunities in those, maybe the more unobvious opportunities for companies that could overcome these roadblocks?
Sure. So, I think the obvious ones, and all this is predicated on that last point, where Good Harvest Company is focused very specifically on leveraging that, what we'll call cannabis shopper data. It's really the purest form of intent. While you can model behaviors through the way people browse websites or mobile devices, and you can mimic the traits of that audience, it's not super definitive. Whereas if you're taking data coming from the source and you're tying it back to an actual shopping and more so importantly, a buying behavior, that's really the purest form of intent. When you're putting down hard-earned money for a product, pretty obvious that you want that product. And when you start coupling that with things like frequency, how often are you purchasing at location, again, which is extremely important to adhere to advertising guidelines and regulations. It really becomes important to be able to focus on where those purchases are occurring, how often they're occurring, so you can paint a really vibrant picture of those consumers. And the obvious is for those brands to be able to take that highly targeted data and create more efficacy around digital media, make that data segments portable so they can activate it on either websites or mobile devices or other forms of digital media channels that are out there. I'd say the non-obvious side is mainstream marketers. You have much larger budgets, specifically coming from consumer packaged goods advertisers, quick serve restaurants, fast food restaurants, brands like Totino's Pizza Rolls, Brands like Uber and Lyft, who want to avoid consumers and have them avoid impaired driving, avoid the munchies. It's a trite example, but Lay's potato chips, you start getting into things like that. And this becomes another way that those marketers, again, can focus on those known consumers versus those assumed consumers.
Before we got on, we talked about, you mentioned a little bit about an exchange. It's first I've heard of this, and I don't know if we want to get super deep into this, but maybe you can just give everybody an overview of what you told me.
Sure. This is the part where it gets fun, where we can take all that rich data. The data has to go somewhere, and it has to be, like I mentioned earlier, portable. And that's where the notion of media exchanges come in. That was a large part of the last 7 years of my career. If you think of media exchanges like the stock market, instead of stocks, you're basically trading inventory. And that inventory could be on a website, it could be on a mobile device, it could be a streaming audio ad on Pandora. Every publisher has additional inventory that they need to sell. If they have their own sales team, they're most likely not selling all of their inventory. If they don't have a sales team, they're relying on these exchanges to have brands access that inventory, much like stocks. If you think about a buyer set and a seller set, that's where the exchanges come in. It's effectively creating a marketplace so buyers can be connected with those sellers that are selling that inventory on these open marketplaces. And a bidding process starts happening at that point. That's where the value around that inventory becomes created. You could do a lot of interesting targeting. There's a lot of targeting opportunities that you could take advantage of within these exchanges. Some of the exchanges have data on hand. Some of them allow brands to bring their own data to the table. This is meeting in the middle, where Good Harvest will be essentially interacting with those exchanges. We're a data management platform at the end of the day. Integration within those types of exchanges allows for those marketers to add on that extra piece of data tied to those shopping behaviors. So instead of just reaching every single cannabis consumer that resides in the state of Nevada, we could focus our efforts just on specific counties or zip codes based on those known buying behaviors by layering on a data component. There's extra cost to it. Per thousand in the media world, the CPM, we have the ability to leverage up those CPMs. So it's better for the brand at the end of the day. While they're spending more, their targeting efficacy is increasing, and the results in turn increase as well.
And that's what Good Harvest Company is going to bring to the table. Can you explain to us exactly how your company will do that?
Sure. So it starts with those owners of the data. It's critical. One of the main components that we're laser focused on is purposeful use of that data and really paying strict attention to not exposing any kind of personal information off of that. The targeting opportunities come through not so much the person who's making the purchase, but the device that's activating that purchase. There's a lot of retailers who are putting their inventory online, make it easier for their consumers to shop before they come into the store. They might shop, they might purchase online if they're in a legal state, and then have that either delivered through a service, or they might have a express lane pickup in addition to coming into the store day in and day out. For those types of consumers, that's where we're starting. We're starting with those consumers that are interacting through those desktop e-commerce platforms that are being used by the retailers, or they're browsing on their mobile device. There's anonymous data that can be collected, which isn't exposing any kind of personal information about that user. It's allowing the personal information to be kept by the data owner, which is the retailer. Retailer 100% owns you as a consumer by virtue of you transacting with them. So by taking those devices and matching the buying and shopping behaviors against the device, we can match that device. If I'm a shopper and I go on, let's just say Green Dragon's mobile site before I go in and purchase at their store, one of their store locations in Colorado, they've got identity against my iPhone. My iPhone can then be targeted wherever I may be. I may be on an app, I may be on a mobile website, but that ID is then being triggered, and a brand can effectively reach me as the device and me behind the device as the ideal consumer who purchased an edibles product at Green Dragon.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. That is
great stuff.
Yeah, that's really great stuff. Well, tell us how investors could get involved with your company.
Perfect. So right now, full startup, pre-revenue mode. We've got a seed round in play, structured everything under a convertible note. It's a target raise of $1.5 million. We've got a 20% discount on a follow-up round with a $5 million valuation cap. The trigger against that cap is $1.5 million on a follow-on round. I've broken the raise basically into 3 tranches of $500,000 each. So right now we're in phase 1. We've got about 60% of that raised to date. We're looking to close that by the end of 2018 to continue working on our minimum viable product, or MVP, or prototype. That allows us to get to phase 2, which would include a beta launch, bring in some first revenue, test clients in the first half of 2019, and then tranche 3 really focus on the end of 2019, where we start showing some traction, some monthly recurring revenue, projections to annual recurring revenue. But we see this as a solid opportunity to become driving about $1 million in short-term revenue within the first year of operation, seeing anywhere between 30 to 50 million between the first 3 to 4 years, with really healthy margins attached to it. Once we have that base built, a lot of the investment cost is really on the technology side. That technology becomes a lot more scalable, particularly as more markets start coming online. Regardless, we're seeing that trend where more states are getting on board, Canada coming obviously on board full on in the next month or so. And that's where we see more of the opportunity. More sales lead to more needs for marketing and partitioning the total sales against that market. And that's where we're those forecasts against.
Well, Eric Meth is the CEO of Good Harvest Co., which is a data-led cannabis audience platform. And all of Good Harvest information is on the MJBulls website at MJBulls.com, including their pitch deck, which you really should look at because it takes a fairly technical business and makes it understandable. It also lists everyone that's on their advisory team, which, by the way, is very impressive. So if you have a chance, go to the MJBulls website and check out their pitch deck. Really makes a complicated or a technical business not so technical. Eric, thanks for being with us on the MJBulls podcast.
Thank you, Dan. It's been great. Appreciate the time and look forward to seeing the response and happy to answer any questions. If you want to reach me, invest@goodharvest.co. That message will find its way to me. Appreciate the time.
Sounds good. Good luck, Eric. Thanks for listening to the MJBulls podcast. To learn more about today's guest or to apply to be a guest, visit our website at MJBulls.com. And if you like our show, give us a review on iTunes. Today's show was produced by Bumminit Media. I'm Dan Humiston, and you've been listening to the MJBulls podcast.